Paul McCartney, songs that never die. Some melodies never fade, they just change shape. From the gray streets of Liverpool, Paul McCartney turned pain into art and let it be lost in eternity. Yesterday, Hey Jude, Let It Be, are not just songs, but also echoes from the human heart still reverberating long after they have stopped. Follow along to discover more about this man's eventful life and musical career. Some melodies never die. They linger in the air long after the hands that played them are gone. There are songs that outlive their creators, and there are songs that seem to outlive time itself. Paul McCartney belongs to that second kind. He is not just a man who wrote music. He is a man who gave the world a reason to listen again. From the smoky nights of Liverpool to the glittering lights of global fame, his story is not about money or legacy. It's about survival through sound, about how a melody can heal what words never could. Imagine being born into a city still coughing from war, into a house where food was scarce, but dreams were endless. That was Paul's childhood. His mother, a nurse, taught him compassion before she was taken too soon. His father, a jazz musician, filled the silence with rhythm. When tragedy came, when the world took his mother, it left him a piano. And from that moment, every note he played became a quiet prayer against loss. In those trembling chords, a boy began to turn grief into harmony. Liverpool in those post-war years was gray and restless. But for Paul, it was alive with sound, the hum of factories, the echo of dock workers, the whisper of rain against narrow streets. Somewhere between those sounds, music became a way out, a form of hunger. Yes, but also a form of hope. He didn't dream of fame. He dreamed of feeling whole. And that hunger for meaning, that quiet fire to turn pain into art, became the invisible thread that would one day tie the world to his songs. Before there were stadiums and screaming fans, there was just a boy at a piano barefoot in Liverpool, trying to find his mother's voice in the keys. No audience, no cameras, no applause, only a question: can a song save a life? Decades later, his answer would echo through generations. Because when McCartney sang "Let It Be," he wasn't preaching peace to the world, he was speaking to that broken boy within himself, the one who still played for the ghost of his mother. Paul McCartney's journey is not a fairy tale of fame. It's a map of endurance of loss, love mistakes and rebirth, a melody that refused to die. The man who once stood beside Lennon, who carried the weight of the Beatles, who lost and loved again and again, until he learned that the greatest fortune isn't counted in dollars or awards, it's counted in the hearts that his music continues to reach. Because when everything fades, fame, youth, applause, what remains is the echo of a song that never stopped singing. Liverpool, after World War II, was a wounded city learning to breathe again. Bombed docks, broken glass, the gray sky pressing low over narrow streets. It was a place where the working class rebuilt the world with blistered hands and tired hope. For young Paul McCartney, born in 1942, that city was both cradle and cage. His family lived modestly on Forthlin Road, where laughter had to compete with rationing and music was the only luxury that didn't cost a thing. The McCartneys weren't rich, but they were rich in melody. His father, Jim, led a small jazz band in his youth and filled the house with old standards on the upright piano. His mother, Mary, a midwife and nurse, carried the sound of kindness in her every gesture. Together, they built a small island of warmth amid post-war austerity. But that warmth was short-lived. When Paul was just 14, his mother passed away from illness, the same fate that years later would touch Linda, the love of his life. Her death carved a silence so deep it seemed to swallow color itself. For the first time, Paul felt the world stop. And yet, within that stillness, a seed was planted, a need to speak through sound. When the world took his mother, he would later say it gave him a piano. That piano became his diary, his confessional, his sanctuary. Each key pressed was both a cry and a prayer. He didn't yet know it, but the rhythm of his grief would become the pulse of modern music. Liverpool in the 1950s was harsh but alive. On one side, poverty and soot. On the other, the rebellious spark of youth. Music drifted from the Docks' skiffle jazz. Early rock and roll from America, and it collided with the city's Celtic melancholy. Paul absorbed it all. The gospel harmonies, the barroom laughter, the poetry of people trying to survive. He and his brother Michael shared a single room where Paul practiced chords until his fingers blistered. He dreamed not of fame, but of filling the emptiness his mother left behind. There were nights when he'd walk barefoot through the wet cobblestones of Liverpool, listening to the city hum in minor keys. That sound, the rhythm of trains, the cries from the pubs, the echo of rain became the first orchestra of his imagination. He began to believe that music could heal not because someone told him so, but because it was the only thing that ever did. The hunger he carried wasn't just for food or fortune, it was for belonging, for a sense that pain could be transformed into something eternal. That boy, barefoot in Liverpool, didn't know he was writing the prologue to the world's most famous band. He only knew that somewhere between love and loss, a melody was waiting to save him. And when it finally came, it didn't just save him, it gave the world a reason to sing. It was July 6, 1957, a day that would quietly rewrite music history. At a small church fair in Woolton, a teenage boy named Paul McCartney walked into destiny. On stage under the weak English sun, a scruffy skiffle band called the Quarrymen was playing. Led by another Liverpool boy, John Lennon, John was rebellious, sharp, and raw, with eyes that seemed to challenge the world. Paul, shy but precise, watched him from the crowd, studying every chord, every word. After the set, a friend introduced them. Paul tuned his guitar, played 20 Flight Rock, and in a few minutes impressed a boy who rarely admired anyone. That moment was more than an introduction. It was the meeting of two broken mirrors. Both had lost their mothers young. Both had grown up in homes where silence weighed heavy. Both carried an ache that words couldn't soothe. But together with a guitar and a shared hunger to belong, they found what they had been missing, a voice. Lennon and McCartney weren't born legends. They were just two kids trying to drown out the sound of loss. Their harmonies became their therapy, their laughter, their rebellion. They started meeting in Paul's small living room, surrounded by teacups, cigarette smoke, and the faint hum of his father's piano. They didn't have ambition, they had obsession. Hours disappeared as they traded verses and melodies, building songs like bridges out of their loneliness. They were different in every way. John's fire met Paul's tenderness. Chaos met structure. Rage met beauty. But that clash was magic. Together they discovered that creation wasn't about perfection, it was about connection. Liverpool became their workshop. They played wherever someone would listen, school halls, dusty clubs, backyards. No one yet knew they were building the backbone of modern music. What made them special wasn't genius, it was empathy. They didn't just write songs, they felt them. Every lyric, every chord carried the weight of boys who had lost mothers but found brothers. That day in 1957 wasn't just the start of the Beatles. It was the day two lonely hearts decided that silence didn't have to win. A guitar, a handshake, a shared grief, and the world would never sound the same again. Before they were gods of pop culture, they were just boys in leather jackets chasing survival through smoke and noise. In 1960, the Beatles, still rough, still nameless, left Liverpool for Hamburg, Germany. It wasn't a glamorous tour. It was a test of endurance. The clubs they played in were dim-packed and alive with the smell of music and rebellion. They performed 8 hours a night, 7 days a week, sleeping in cramped rooms behind the stage, living on cheap food and adrenaline. But out of that chaos, something sacred was born: discipline, unity, and the raw power that would one day electrify the world. Paul was just 18, still figuring out who he was. When their original bassist, Stuart Sutcliffe, fell in love with a German artist and began to drift away, Paul reluctantly picked up the bass. He hated it. At first it felt like a demotion, but that frustration became his forge. Out of resentment, he carved beauty. Out of loss, he created invention. With his left-handed bass and melodic precision, McCartney reinvented the instrument, turning rhythm into poetry, background into heartbeat. Hamburg transformed him from a dreamer into a craftsman. The nights in the Reeperbahn district were brutal but unforgettable. The Beatles learned to survive crowds that wanted to drink, not listen. To keep attention, they played harder, faster, louder. John's wit became sharper, George's fingers quicker, and Paul's voice, once boyish, began to roar with emotion. They were no longer just performing, they were becoming. Those endless nights stripped away fear. Every mistake, every jeer, every broken string became a lesson. But the fire that shaped them also burned. They watched friends crumble. Stuart, the quiet artist who had been their heart, died at just 21. The loss hit Paul harder than he ever admitted. Death had followed him again, another empty chair, another echo. But this time, instead of breaking, he built. He turned the pain into rhythm, the exhaustion into melody. By the time they returned to England, they were no longer a group of Liverpool boys. They were a band that had survived the crucible. Hamburg had given them scars, stamina, and sound. The city didn't make them famous, it made them real. In those neon-lit nights, the Beatles learned that greatness isn't born in applause, but in struggle. And in that struggle, Paul McCartney learned that even fire can sing. When the Beatles returned from Hamburg, they carried more than guitars, they carried fire. By 1963, the band had evolved into a phenomenon that no one could control, not even themselves. Beatlemania swept across Britain like a storm, then leapt across the ocean to America, exploding on The Ed Sullivan Show in February 1964. 73 million people watched 4 young men from Liverpool transform the air into electricity. Overnight, they weren't just musicians, they were mirrors of a generation awakening. Paul stood at the center of it all, charming, melodic, effortlessly human. His songs like Yesterday and Hey Jude became emotional anchors for millions. Yesterday alone would go on to become the most covered song in history, proof that simplicity, when honest, could outlast any trend. But behind the smiles, fame was devouring them. The crowd screamed so loud that they couldn't hear their own instruments. Their days became a blur as airports, hotel rooms, interviews, and noise. They were adored by the world, and yet each of them, especially Paul, began to feel the strange loneliness of living inside a legend. Success didn't come with peace, it came with pressure. John was growing restless. George was searching for meaning, and Paul tried to hold the center, the diplomat, the perfectionist, the one who refused to let the dream fall apart. His drive kept the band alive, but it also made him the lightning rod for tension. The friendship that once healed them was now cracking under the weight of expectation. The Beatles had changed the world, but the world was beginning to change them. Then came the strangest rumor in rock history. Paul is dead. In 1969, fans around the globe convinced themselves that McCartney had died in a car crash and been replaced by a look-alike. It was absurd, but also haunting. For Paul, it was a surreal kind of torment to walk the earth while being mourned by millions. Imagine reading your own obituary every morning, he once said. Fame had blurred the line between truth and illusion. By the end of the decade, the dream had started to collapse under its own perfection. Yet in the eye of the storm, Paul remained what he had always been, a songwriter trying to make sense of noise. The world saw 4 boys who changed music. Paul saw 4 sons of Liverpool who had changed each other. And though the empire was crumbling, the music was immortal. The songs didn't die. They simply moved from the stage into the soul of humanity, exactly where he always meant them to live. By 1970, the unthinkable had happened. The Beatles, the band that defined an era that stitched the world together through melody, was no more. What began as creative tension had turned into emotional exhaustion. The 4 boys who once finished each other's songs now spoke through lawyers and press statements. For Paul McCartney, it wasn't just the end of a band. It was the end of his family, his identity, his home. He retreated to his farm in Scotland, far from London's noise and headlines. The fields were quiet, the air cold, and the nights unbearably long. He fell into a deep silence and isolation. The man who once made the world sing, one biographer wrote, now couldn't hear his own voice. The piano that had once been his comfort now felt heavy, his guitar mute. For months, he wandered in silence, lost between the life he'd lived and the life he didn't know how to start. But creation has a strange way of surviving despair. In the middle of that isolation, Paul began recording again, not for fame, not for charts, but for healing. In his home studio with a 4-track tape machine and the sound of sheep outside, he made the McCartney album. Raw, imperfect, honest, it was a whisper of resurrection. Songs like Maybe I'm Amazed weren't crafted for the world's approval. They were messages to himself, to Linda, to love. He wasn't chasing the Beatles' shadow anymore. He was learning to stand in his own light. The press mocked him at first. They called it unfinished, unpolished, fragmented. But what they didn't understand was that it wasn't supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be real. It was the sound of a man learning to breathe again after drowning in success. And slowly, through the static and the heartbreak, Paul rediscovered the simplest truth of his art, that music isn't born from fame, it's born from need. What broke him wasn't failure, it was silence. And what saved him wasn't applause, it was a single fragile decision to keep playing. In that lonely Scottish farm, far from the screams of Beatlemania, a man rebuilt himself note by note. The world thought the music had ended, but Paul McCartney was only beginning his second act. From the silence of his Scottish exile, a new chapter began to form, not in studios or stadiums, but in the simple rhythm of family life. Paul McCartney had lost a band, but he had found something more enduring: love. Linda Eastman, a photographer from New York, entered his world not as a fan or collaborator, but as an equal. She didn't just love the legend, she loved the man still learning how to live again. Together, they built a new sound, a new family, and a new purpose. In 1971, they formed Wings, a band that critics dismissed at first as McCartney's experiment. But Paul wasn't trying to chase the Beatles. He was trying to escape their shadow. He wanted imperfection laughter, the freedom to fail. With Linda on keyboards, Denny Lane on guitar, and a rotating lineup of musicians, Wings became a family on the road, raising kids, writing songs, and performing in small towns that had never seen a Beatle before. The world might have doubted them, but Paul had already learned that true creation doesn't need permission. The breakthrough came with Band on the Run, 1973, an album recorded in Lagos, Nigeria under brutal conditions, stolen tapes, sweltering heat, and exhaustion. But out of chaos came brilliance. The record soared to the top of charts worldwide, proving that Paul's magic hadn't died with the Beatles, it had evolved. He was no longer the voice of a generation. He was the architect of his own rebirth. Then came Mull of Kintyre, a song about home, love, and belongings written with bagpipes and heart. It became one of the best-selling singles in British history, even surpassing the Beatles' own records. For Paul, it wasn't just success, it was closure. Wings was more than a band. It was his healing in motion. He and Linda turned touring into a lifestyle. They brought their children along, cooking vegetarian meals backstage, making music between diaper changes and sunsets. There was no glamour, no ego, just joy. Linda grounded him, reminded him that life's rhythm was not found in applause, but in laughter at breakfast, in watching their kids grow in a quiet walk on the Scottish hills. Through Wings, Paul proved something profound, that art doesn't die with tragedy, it transforms, that love can rebuild what fame destroys, and that even after losing everything, the right person can make you believe in music again. By the late 1990s, Paul and Linda had built the kind of life that fame rarely allows, one rooted in love, children, and quiet purpose. They had shared everything: the stage, the studio, the road, and the table. For nearly 30 years, she had been his anchor, his bandmate, his mirror. But fate, with its cruel symmetry, returned to write a familiar chapter. The same disease that had taken his mother now came for Linda. In 1998, after a long and private health battle, she passed away peacefully at their ranch in Arizona. Paul was devastated. "You never get over losing someone like that," he said softly. "You just learn to live beside the emptiness." For the second time in his life, the universe had taken the woman who steadied him. He withdrew from the world again, retreating into silence this time, not out of anger, but heartbreak. Friends recall that he refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, he turned pain into motion. He devoted himself to the causes Linda cared about: vegetarianism, animal rights, environmental work. He carried her message forward as if she were still beside him, shaping his kindness with her memory. Every song he wrote in those years seemed to carry a trace of her voice, a gentle harmony woven between notes. Paul once said that when Linda died, he could still feel her in the smallest things: the wind through trees, the smell of coffee in the morning, the softness of a piano key. Grief became his invisible duet partner, and through that grief, his music changed. It grew slower, more reflective, less about crowds, and more about connection. He didn't fill the stage the same way anymore, he inhabited it. Every performance became a quiet tribute not to loss, but to love that refused to fade. "Maybe I'm amazed," once written for her, who sounded like a prayer whispered across time. The boy who had lost his mother at 14 was now a man losing his soulmate. Yet just like before, he turned to the only thing that had ever saved him: the song. And through it, Linda never truly left. Because love, once set to music, becomes eternal. After years of mourning, the world watched as Paul McCartney, now in his 60s, opened his heart again. In 2002, he married Heather Mills, a former model and activist, known for her humanitarian work and for surviving a devastating accident that cost her a leg. To outsiders, it looked like hope reborn: two people who had endured tragedy, finding love in each other's resilience. The press called it a fairy tale. But fairy tales rarely survive the headlines. At first, Paul seemed alive again, smiling, laughing, talking about second chances. Heather was strong, outspoken, and passionate, the opposite of Linda's calm presence. She pushed him back into the spotlight, urging him to live boldly. For a while, it worked. They appeared together at charity events, speaking about peace war, relief, and compassion. But beneath the surface, tension grew. The marriage became a stage too bright, every argument magnified, every gesture dissected by tabloids hungry for scandal. By 2006, the love story had turned into a storm. Accusations, rumors, lawsuits, the media fed endlessly on their pain. The man who once wrote "Let It Be" was now dragged through headlines filled with noise and judgment. One love left him in silence, a journalist wrote; the other left him in uproar. The divorce that followed was messy, public, and humiliating, a spectacle that hurt both of them deeply. But through the chaos, Paul did something rare. He refused to respond with anger. He didn't let bitterness define him. He had already lived through loss far deeper than scandal. He knew fame could distort truth, and he chose dignity over revenge. The trial ended, the cameras moved on, and Paul retreated again, older, quieter, and wiser. What the world saw as failure, he saw as another lesson in love's unpredictability. Every heartbreak had taught him something, that even pain can refine the soul. After the storm, he found calm, not in applause, but in solitude. He went back to writing, recording, walking along the countryside trails that once inspired him. For Paul McCartney, love, no matter how it ended, was still worth the risk. Because to stop loving, he believed, was to stop living. When Nancy Shevell entered Paul McCartney's life, it wasn't with fireworks, it was with calm. She was elegant, understated, and kind of the opposite of everything the tabloids expected. A successful businesswoman from New York, Nancy wasn't dazzled by fame. She understood it. Their connection was built not on spectacle, but on silence, two people who had already seen what love could build and what it could destroy. They met in the late 2000s, quietly, almost by accident. She was steady, grounded, and warm. Someone who didn't demand the spotlight, but offered sanctuary from it. For a man who had lived his life in front of cameras, that quiet was revolutionary. After all the noise, Paul would later say, "She taught me that silence could sing." By the time they married in 2011, Paul was nearly 70, and yet love had found a new rhythm, slower, softer, wiser. Gone were the grand gestures, the whirlwind tours of romance. What replaced them was simplicity. Shared breakfasts, long walks, a life where fame no longer dictated the tempo. Nancy gave him the kind of peace that doesn't make headlines, the kind that simply exists. Those who knew Paul noticed the change. He smiled differently, not the public grin of a performer, but the quiet ease of a man finally at home. Nancy didn't replace Linda or erase his past. She honored it. She stood beside a man who had already lived several lifetimes and helped him live this one with grace. Together, they built a world of ordinary joys, morning tea, gentle conversations, the laughter of grandchildren, the sound of wind brushing through their garden in Sussex. At 69, Paul found what fame could never buy: contentment. Not the thrill of applause, but the comfort of stillness. Not the echo of the crowd, but the heartbeat of companionship. With Nancy, life no longer demanded he perform. It simply invited him to be. After decades of love and loss, Paul McCartney had finally found the quiet he had been searching for since that barefoot boy first sat at a piano in Liverpool. Not silence born of sorrow, but peace born of understanding, the sound of a soul that had finally come home. Behind the brightness of fame, Paul McCartney's life was never without shadows. In his youth, success came fast and burned hot. And like many of his generation, he stumbled through the haze of experimentation. There were late nights, wild crowds, and moments when he tested the edges of freedom a little too far. He was once briefly detained in Japan in 1980, a moment that forced him to reflect and change course. Yet even then, his reaction wasn't arrogance but reflection. It was stupid, he later admitted. But maybe I needed that moment to stop and think. McCartney never hid from his flaws. He learned from them. Where others sank deeper into excess, he chose to evolve. He replaced the chaos with discipline, the parties with purpose. He became a vegetarian long before it was fashionable, practicing mindfulness and meditation to stay grounded. He spoke openly about his struggles, not to seek pity, but to remind others that even idols are human. His redemption wasn't loud. It was lived day by day in choices that brought him closer to compassion. Through the decades, Paul transformed temptation into teaching. He guided his children with the honesty of a man who'd been both saint and sinner, rock star and father. To his fans, he became a symbol of endurance proof that mistakes don't define you unless you stop learning from them. He turned his stage into a place of hope, often pausing during concerts to share small stories of humility and humor, connecting not as a legend, but as a man who had walked through fire and come out gentler. Redemption isn't a comeback, he once said. It's the courage to face your own shadows. That courage became the quiet rhythm of his later years. Paul no longer sought perfection, he sought meaning. His life, once measured in chart-topping hits, was now measured in kindness, in gratitude, in how he treated the people around him. Fame had given him everything and taken much away. But it was through his mistakes that he found what mattered most: clarity. The man who once sang about yesterday had learned to live fully in today. Because redemption for Paul McCartney wasn't about rewriting the past, it was about finally forgiving himself. As the years passed, Paul McCartney began to see time not as an enemy, but as a collaborator. He no longer chased it, he listened to it. "Time doesn't steal from me," he once said softly. "It just teaches me how to listen." In his 80s, he walks with the calm of a man who has already lived a dozen lives. The energy that once set stadiums on fire now flows into gentler moments. Morning walks, quiet sketches, conversations about the past that no longer hurt. For Paul, age isn't decay, it's rhythm. Every wrinkle, every scar, every memory is a note in the great unfinished song of his life. The young boy who once sought escape through music now uses it to stay present. When he plays Blackbird on stage, his fingers may move slower, but his soul moves deeper. The crowd still sings along, not because of nostalgia, but because his music has grown with them, wiser, tenderer, timeless. He no longer performs to prove anything. The applause has become a thank you instead of a need. The spotlight, once afire, now feels like sunlight, warm, forgiving. He meditates, paints, and spends time with his family. He speaks of Linda, of John, of George, not with sorrow, but gratitude. "They're not gone," he says. "They're just in another verse." Time, in his view, is not a thief, but a composer. It slows the tempo, deepens the tone, softens the keys. What he once called ambition has become acceptance. The restlessness of youth has turned into the grace of reflection. He's learned that the true measure of life isn't how loud you sang, but how long your song keeps playing in others. Paul McCartney doesn't run from time, he harmonizes with it. He's no longer trying to outlive his legacy. He's simply living it. The boy who played barefoot in Liverpool has become a man who can sit in silence and still hear the music. And in that silence there is peace, the final, most beautiful melody of all. From Liverpool's narrow streets to the sunlit fields of Sussex, from London townhouses To quiet American ranches, Paul McCartney's life has become a constellation of memories scattered across the map. Each place holds an echo, a note, a face. In Cavendish Avenue, he once wrote songs that redefined pop music. In his Scottish farmhouse, he learned how to be a husband, a father, and a man who could live without applause. Every home, every corner still hums with ghosts, the laughter of John, the calm of Linda, the meditative silence of George. Even the walls, he once said, seem to hum the songs that healed me. But these are not museums of nostalgia. They are living archives, reminders that life's truest wealth lies not in what we collect, but in what we carry. Paul's empire was never built on gold records or awards, but on love that outlasted tragedy. He kept the handwritten lyrics, the family photos, the old instruments, not to show the world what he achieved, but to remember what it cost. His fortune sits in vaults, yes, but his heart lives in melodies still sung by strangers who have never met him. When he visits his old homes, he does so without grandeur. He stands where yesterday was born, where Linda cooked, where his children played, where silence once seemed unbearable and now feels sacred. Time has turned his pain into presence. Every photograph, every chord progression, every fading letter is proof that memory isn't something that keeps you in the past. It's what teaches you how to stay human in the present. Paul's life today is a quiet museum without walls. His concerts are pilgrimages, not performances. His fans don't just come to hear the songs, they come to remember what those songs meant to their own lives. In every verse, they find pieces of their own memories reflected back. And that perhaps is the greatest gift he ever gave the world. Not fame, not fortune, but remembrance. Because in the end, Paul McCartney's greatest empire isn't built of bricks or money, it's built of echoes. Echoes of love, of loss, of the stubborn beauty of life itself. And long after the last curtain falls, those echoes will keep singing. By the time Paul McCartney's net worth passed $1 billion, he had already learned the simplest truth. Wealth means nothing if it cannot make you feel alive. To the world, he is one of the richest musicians in history. To himself, he is still that boy in Liverpool chasing a sound that could fill the emptiness. My wealth, he once said, is measured by the songs that outlive me. At 83, his fortune no longer defines him, his peace does. He rises early, takes long walks with his wife Nancy, and still eats the vegetarian meals he once shared with Linda. He meditates daily, writes music in bursts of intuition, and often sketches between studio sessions. His fame has aged into quiet influence. He funds animal welfare programs, supports music education, and uses his name not to dominate headlines, but to uplift. What makes Paul remarkable isn't how much he has, but how little he needs. His world now moves at the pace of gratitude. He still records albums, tours occasionally, and sings the same songs that once carried entire generations through heartbreak and hope. But when he performs, let it be. Now his voice trembles with something purer than youth acceptance. He no longer sings to prove he's still relevant. He sings because he still feels. Money once symbolized survival, then success, and now simply stewardship. He gives freely to causes, to art, to the future. His offices are filled with instruments, not trophies. His calendar balances work with wonder. He lives simply, quietly, intentionally. The man who once ruled the charts now finds joy in the sound of birds outside his window, in watching his grandchildren dance to songs he wrote decades before they were born. Paul McCartney has become proof that legacy isn't a possession. It's a conversation between generations. His name is wealth, yes, but his soul is freedom. He no longer needs applause to feel seen or money to feel secure. His greatest investment has always been the same, the faith that music can still change the world. And even now, as the years soften his voice, that faith sings louder than ever. Because beyond all the numbers, beyond all the fame, what remains is a man who built his life not on fortune, but on melody. When you look back at Paul McCartney's life, it doesn't read like a biography. It sounds like a symphony. A composition made of joy and loss, rebellion and peace, silence and song. From the barefoot boy at a piano in Liverpool to the legend whose melodies circled the planet. His story is not about fame, it's about what music can do to the human soul. His life carries every movement of a grand symphony, the prelude of childhood sorrow when he learned that music could speak to the dead, the crescendo of the Beatles when four friends from a forgotten city rewrote the rhythm of the world, the dissonance of heartbreak when the band fell apart, when Linda died, when faith seemed lost, and finally the gentle adagio of his later years, where time itself became his duet partner and silence became song. Fame fades. Love hurts. But music survives. It weaves through generations, healing wounds that words can't reach. When McCartney sings, "Hey Jude," stadiums full of strangers sing back in unison, and for a few minutes, the world feels whole again. When "Let It Be" plays in a hospital room, a child somewhere finds courage. That is the real legacy, not the fortune, not the fame, but the invisible heartbeat that his songs have given to humanity. He doesn't need monuments. His monuments are the people he's touched. The couple who fell in love to something. The soldier who came home humming Blackbird. The lonely teenager who found hope in the long and winding road. Every listener has carried a piece of him, and through them, he has never stopped living. Now, in the twilight of his years, Paul McCartney stands not as the last Beatle, but as a bridge between what was and what will always be. His story reminds us that even when the spotlight fades, even when the crowd goes home, the music remains. It breathes, it waits, it keeps singing for those who still believe. If his songs have ever made you smile through tears or helped you stand when life felt heavy, then his journey is already part of yours. Because this isn't just the story of Paul McCartney. It's the story of all of us, how we break, how we heal, and how somehow the song never dies. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to USA Legends Never Fade, where the music, the memories, and the legends live on. Tell us in the comments which Paul McCartney song has carried you through life. Stay with us for more stories that prove legends never fade.